A very good afternoon, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman ISAS NUS and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, Professor Subrata Mitra, Director and Visiting Research Professor, ISAS NUS, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Taisha and I have the pleasure of being your MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, I welcome you to this afternoon's 4th ISAS lecture titled India, Democracy Against Development. To start the proceedings, I would like to invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman ISAS NUS and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, to deliver the opening remarks. Ambassador Pillai, please.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 4th ISAS lecture. This series of lectures was initiated by Professor Mitra, the speaker today. The purpose was to get the collective wisdom of our senior researchers and visiting fellows and get them to share it with people in Singapore, the stakeholders, other scholars, anyone who's interested in South Asia, their perspective of the various aspects of South Asia. I've been, opening these sessions so often I forget some of the niceties that have to be observed. I should first recognize the fact that we have 3 High Commissioners here and 1 Deputy High Commissioner now. Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Deputy High Commissioner of Sri Lanka. Welcome to this session. The first lecture was delivered, ISAS lecture was delivered by Sri Menon, the former Foreign Secretary of India. The second one was by Vinod Rai, and the third one was the Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Subrata. This went out very well received. And the fourth, I wanted to invite this Professor Mitra because of the role he has played in initiating this series. I'll talk about him a little later. India, as a nation of 1.3 billion people and with more than 800 million people who are on the voting list. The prime purpose of mentioning this is that it was to have elections in India with that sort of massive numbers and hold it every 5 years. You have a change, a shifting of the power. Sometimes the same party comes in, but it is so well done. It is amazing that nothing untoward happens. There's time when there's accusations of votes being captured and that sort of thing. Let us stop, because institutions have been created, like the Election Commission, which actually ensure that these elections carry out. So when you look at more advanced countries struggling to count their votes, and you see how efficiently it is done in India, it is something of some worthy of some admiration. But now it has become faster. It's taken as a matter of course. There's an election in India almost every day of the year. There's the state election, there's the national election, there's the state elections, there's municipal elections, and so on. So I'm sure there's something happening every day, just like there's a protest some part of India every day. If not any other part, at least in Kerala there will be one. You are sure of that. So it's always interesting. but it also shows the vibrance, the robustness of the democratic system. The ethnic and religious diversity of India sometimes inhibits the growth or the practice of democracy. The democratic process in the country has still managed to create over the years a coherent national identity that brings together an extremely heterogeneous citizenry. The durability of Indian democracy, despite the country's low income status and entrenched inequalities, has earned much admiration on the global scene. As I mentioned, part of this is due to the institutions that have been created and how these institutions work, and some due to the legislation that has been. I remember distinctly one of the legislations, how it worked, and it looked a little interesting. They have the right to information, right to education, and then the other one, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. The right to information, I had a little close, sort of relationship with this, because this was when Mr. Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister. He appointed a foreign secretary who was not the most senior person in the ranking, but this gentleman, Dr. Manmohan Singh, bypassed with several people and appointed him as foreign secretary. One of those bypassed then decided to go to court under the right to information and demanded to know on what basis this appointment was made. It's very interesting because the court looked at it very carefully, deliberated on it, and then decided that the Prime Minister, a view that I would agree, being a Singaporean, that the Prime Minister had the right to appoint someone he thought was best suited for a job. And therefore, the motion, the petition was sort of thrown out, and the ruling was. Now, the aggrieved party had an opportunity to present this case. The decision, of course, didn't go his way, but the decision was accepted by everybody else. So it's a very good example of how some of these legislations and institutions work and how it benefits. The next point that I wanted to talk about was about the speaker. Professor Mitra has been with us for 2 years. He joined ISAS. I'm an ancient institution within ISAS, so I know the history better than most people. He joined at a time when ISAS was somewhat in a coasting along mode, because it's lost a little bit of its initial fervor and began to coast along. At that time, Tan Tai Yong and myself decided that we needed to have a full-time director. And we went through the process, advertised the university as well, a somewhat cumbersome process, and selection was made. Dr. Mitra became our director. You must have, normally when you talk about academics, the word irascible comes to you, irritable, and short-tempered and sort of thing. Now, Professor Mitra is the exact opposite of that. His mellifluous words will charm any bird off the tree. And what is good is that apart from his words, his wisdom is also very, very deep. His knowledge is deep, and he guided and steered ISAS in the last 3 years and brought it to where it is today. One of the most active think tanks in the world. I'm very grateful to him for this. And we have now agreed that though he is going back in another two days or so, he will visit us. He will come back as a visiting fellow into ISAS, and we'll keep the relationship going. Ladies and gentlemen, I think on the topic, I have my views, but I'm not going to bore you with my views. I think you're here to hear Professor Mitra's views. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for being here. I see such a good attendance, and I'm very, very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pillai. It is now my pleasure to invite Professor Subrata Mitra, Director and Visiting Research Professor, ISAS NUS, to deliver the 4th ISAS lecture on India, Democracy Against Development. Professor Mitra, please.
Chairman, Excellencies, dignitaries, distinguished audience, my fellow researchers and administrators from ISAS, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It is a little overwhelming to be with you all, and it doesn't feel like I'm leaving, because today is my last working day, and on the 12th I depart. As I say, you can take him out of Singapore, but you can't take Singapore out of him. So Singapore will travel with me. Chairman, I'm very grateful to you for giving me an opportunity to see in 3 years what sheer human will, actual leadership, and hard work can produce. The ISAS story is the same as the Singapore story, the two running parallel. And 3 years of it will stay with me always. But today, I would like to start with a very, very general question. Is it possible to have a political system which can give voice to people powerful enough to kick the rascals out and provide a basic minimum of food, clothing, and shelter, and guarantee the dignity of being human and identity? When I ask a question in this way to my students in France, Germany, England, countries where I have taught, I see a forest of hands going up. But of course, yes, we have it all. I mean, England did democratically break up what we all thought was a permanent union. France inducted to high office a 40-year-old without a proper political party backing, and the country that I have adopted for my final day, Germany, did the best of them all, had two political parties fighting tooth and nail for a share of power, and what did they do after election? Join hands to share the spoils. It's all possible democratically, and they have worked out a system of guaranteed basic minimum needs. So my students look at me, is that a question? But the moment I ask them a similar question about India, opinion gets terribly divided. Of course, when you ask them about India, they're not thinking about India, they're thinking about China. not just all that Olympic gold China gets, but China delivers. China delivers infrastructure at home, abroad, and when they run out of land, they can produce land on the sea. China has pulled up the ladder 400 million people in recent memory from the poverty trap. China has done it all. How about India? You can see any day in any newspaper. What do you see? Today, poverty scholar, chairman have mentioned several of these things. And I asked myself, where is this common sense about India comes from? Why do my students say, when I ask them, what should India do? Oh, India has to rein in a little bit their democracy and get on with development. India must choose. You can't have it both ways. So, when I look at that common sense about India and ask, where is this coming from? I've thought long and hard about it. I find the ultimate source of responsibility that lies in the great minds that wrote the theory of the great transition from feudal era to modernity. I can go on and cite the Harvard political scientist Samuel Huntington, Political Order in Changing Societies, the great historian of political economy of development, Barrington Moore or W.W. Rustow, or Gunnar Myrdal, the great theorist of the soft state. In all these theories, you find one common factor which explains with the satisfaction of the generations of students I've taught, why there has to be a question mark. The one word answer is squeeze. If you want to go from here to there, from poverty to plenty, from feudalism to the modern age, from a traditional society to the modern world, you have to squeeze. You have to squeeze the poor and the vulnerable. You need land to build, not just agricultural land. Land also where there were temples, where there were burial grounds, which will go under the tractor, the bulldozer, or the reservoir. You have to squeeze the peasant into parting with his land so that the small units can be pulverized to large economic units. And you have to put a squeeze on workers. They must produce, but must not consume. So, if you can squeeze them and squeeze out of them resources which you then invest to produce capital, you will start the process of transition, 5 stages of Rustow, until you reach the stage of mass consumption and self-sustaining growth. That's the theory. And then turn around. What do you find in India, independent in 1947, and then Republic 1950? Suddenly, everyone had the right to vote. Everyone would also include the communists who had just fought a bloody revolution in Telangana, uprising, and the Hindu nationalists, one of whom had assassinated Mahatma Gandhi. In one fell swoop, India opens up the floodgates of participation. So the theory will go, what do you expect? Getting the workers, the peasants, the poor, the vulnerable, the right to vote, and then inviting them to join the project of modernization is, as I say, like asking Turkish to vote for Christmas. It will not happen. That is the common sense and the theoretical core of that common sense. So I ask myself, if these people say India doesn't have a chance, what would they say about other people who made it? Once again, the same theorists would say, look at China. Between 58 and 62, in the 7 central provinces, 45 million people were killed, most of them through famine, some through beating, because you're not allowed to run away, and others were eaten. Talk of Soviet Union, remember the famines in Ukraine, remember the Gulag, they were all part of the whole project of modernization. Then you ask the theorists, all right, but how about Europe? Was it always like this? It was not. If you are thinking about 12th century France, this is recorded history, in small town country fairs, you would find for sale a little bit of pig, which is a bit like a sausage, made out of the intestines of Protestants. If you're a Huguenot, you had a problem. In France of Louis XIV, if you're a Huguenot, not only you'll be killed, your bedroom and your kitchen would be accessible to decrepit soldiers, should be billeted in your house, your churches should be desecrated, and the graves should be dug up so that the remains could be thrown to the four winds. Otherwise, the Huguenots might reassemble and rebuild those churches. Talk of England, in the language of Barrington Moore, sheep ate men. How was that? Powerful farmers fenced off large parts of land and public land because suddenly wool became lucrative and peasants were simply turned out. So rising capital in cities and capitalist farmers joined hands to put the squeeze. 18-hour days, child labor, women, accident at work, your hand got chopped off, don't ask for compensation, move over, somebody else will take your job. That is the world of Charles Dickens. That is the world which produced the world of liberal democracy that we know. Now, there was no CNN at the time, and democracy was available to those who survived those bloody purges, each of those revolutions, industrial revolution, territorial revolution, religious revolution, cultural revolution, all of them produce that one mess that we know. One state, one law, one religion, one language, one everything. Europe became nations first, then the nation state, to have democracy and participation and development and all of it. India of Jawaharlal Nehru was not a nation state, it was a state nation. And state nation of India was told by the same theorist, you have to develop, you have to become a state, you have to become a nation, but don't do the way we did it because we'll watch you. You have to make it democratically, knowing fully well that it was a paradox. That is where we leave theory, and India for these people did not stand a chance. A post-colonial state whose liberal institutions did not spring out of the depth of its own illiberal society. A poor state with soft borders, whose deep poverty was ripe with the potential for radical uprising, and most dangerous of all, a Hindu majority, smarting under partition and smarting under the brutal uprooting of millions of people, had the potential to create, out of religion, a fighting machine to crush the minority. The potential was all there. And not to be outdone by theorists, the journalist Selig Harrison actually wrote a book called India, the Most Dangerous Decades. It's a 7-day wonder which will not last. And today, we have just brought out a book, India 70, under the editorship of Mr. Vinod Rai and Dr. Amitan Bhalit, which tells you the story of how, after 7 decades, India is still there, is still growing, still democratic, and still orderly. What then is the Indian secret? How has India achieved this remarkable feat? What implications does this counterfactual have for democratic theory and the common sense about India as a country? We can't have it both ways. Chairman has told you that my time is up, and this is the last lecture I'll be giving while still in full-time employment. But these were the questions that 50 years ago took me away from my family profession of civil service. We have served the colonial ruler for 3 generations and post-independent India for 2 generations. I broke away because I wanted to understand what produces this disparity. If human nature is the same everywhere, why is Orissa poor and at that time Punjab was coming up? Or beyond India, why is there so much diversity? I wanted to understand it not just in terms of India, but I wanted to understand it in general terms. That is where my graduate training in Rochester comes in, and that's where I picked up I call it the 4 core concepts of political behavior: rationality, games, coalitions, and negotiation. These are universal assumptions. Everywhere, people know what they want, and they know what they don't want, and they know what they will settle down for, what is their plan B. And they will use all their resources to push the world towards their most preferred outcome. They will win, they will vote, they will throw a stone, and they will either do or threaten to do something ultimate. That is what I've learned from Professor Riaz. My life as a weapon. Now, that's rationality, and yet people know that you can't win on your own. You're constantly playing a game to win, so you build coalitions, and ultimately you negotiate. With these 4 core concepts, I will approach the problem in front of us today, and I will try to keep to the tradition that my distinguished predecessors have set of having a paper which will be crisp, schematic, and synoptic, and an approach which will pull together the university and the city, or as they say, the town and gown, which will have a policy stretch but a theory edge. Because isn't ISAS a thinking man's think tank? Now, I will follow that tradition with 2 exceptions. The tone of this lecture will be didactic, but not the intent. Because isn't the whole idea of democracy to bridge the gap between the speaker and those who are spoken to? I want to engage you in a conversation, in the Q&A, but also afterward, which is why I have provided a handout. You'll find it on your desks. And on the handout are my key points, which I'll go over in the PowerPoint. And on the back of it are a few references and a model that I'll not talk about unless there are specific questions. But you also have my long-term email contact. That's one of the nice things about being a German professor. Your name for life. So, for the long life that I still have ahead of me, I hope to stay engaged. My second difference from my predecessors will be, I will focus on India, but the method will be comparative. And the idea behind the comparative method is, you learn a few things about India that you might not have known, but you also learn to put what you already know about your own lived-in political reality in a comparative context. With this, I will move over to the paper. The paper is in 5 parts. We'll first talk about the bad news and the good news about India's democracy. Then we'll talk a little about 10 things that India does reasonably well in order to produce good results. Then we'll talk about what do Indians think about their democracy. And then we'll move on to a problematic part as to what makes India India. Is there a kind of Indian essence? Or is India that is producing these results a political construction? Is India accessible through comparative politics? For that, I'll leave India, move over to Pakistan, in order to come back to India again, to show what was given and what have Indians added. And I'll conclude by talking about 5 things that India should seriously and quickly look at critically. Here's the bad news. If you want to build a modern world and a rich, developed world, you will need good infrastructure, energy, and you will need to hold the country together, and you will also need to hold the society together. If you look at these carefully chosen slides, these are pictures that you have seen. As I said, that's the bad news that one quickly gets, that Indians, when when an atomic energy project comes through and land has to be acquired, that's what you see. People agitating. I drove really fast. A whole township that was built in Shingur to produce the cheapest car of that time in the world. All you needed was to switch on the electricity, and it didn't happen. That it sits there still as a ghost town. And you have the great Mera Parker leading the Narmada Bachao Andolan to stop the building of a reservoir which was meant to irrigate 4 dry states, and Mera won worldwide accolade for that great movement. Finally, the dam got built, but it delayed it here. And the top one, you can see for yourself how democracy can turn against itself. The democracy can become majoritarian and send a message of anxiety to the minorities. It actually was a slide taken from Z News, and it's a very touching message. It says, is it that easy to turn us against each other? But you have a picture of anxiety there. But the most difficult one, and that comes from Al Jazeera, is about Kashmir. In Kashmir, democratic India is locked in. India claims Kashmir, all of Kashmir, to be part of India's legitimate legal territory, and yet politics in Kashmir remains deeply mired in everyday violence. It goes on, and you know what the violence is about? It's about freedom, about azadi, which is guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. So that's the bad news. If you look at the same images carefully, you'll find that all these people are agitating not against India, but for the core values of India. I have described this phenomenon in Dr. Pali's book as democracy's angry crowds. These are people who are paying for investors, for district magistrates, for policemen. But at the end of the day, their movement reinforces India's democratic credentials. What is more, you know what else they do besides agitating? They also vote. And after agitating, they go on to join political parties, so that the agitation becomes like a safety valve in a pressure cooker. It is an indication of the conservative dynamism of the system. And for me, it's a good recruiting ground for the thriving democracy that India is, which is where we get the other news about India. India, which many economics theories thought will remain mired in the so-called Hindu rate of growth, where real growth was almost close to the growth of the population, little under 1% real growth. That India is still growing, and at the last count, something like 7%. In terms of the ease of business, India has reached 100, now they're hoping to go a little further. And democracy in India, which was almost myopic, confined to India, is now looking out. And all the 10 leaders of Southeast Asia were honored guests in the Republic Day. India is now reaching out. But my most important slide is this man in saffron. The man in saffron is the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, India's most popular state. He is also a Hindu holy man, the leader of a mutt, the mutt of Gorakhpur. Mahant Adityanath is also Chief Minister. Now, what kind of democracy is this, would you say? A democracy in saffron? That particular picture, you can get it on YouTube, is very, very important for me. It's a picture of the Chief Minister conceding the defeat of the BJP candidate in the last by-poll. After an election, when the loser stands up and says, "We lost because we are not good enough. We have learned. We are going to train better." That's not war. That's political football. You go home to train and live to fight another day. That is the kind of role switching that Indian democracy has achieved. A holy man, a chief minister, an astute politician, a hard-working man can be all of them, and one doesn't really see the inconvenience in it. So I thought I would have to contextualize some of these things in a book that I've done, Politics in India, and in terms of two complementary principles. But the book is an ISAS made book. In ISAS, I was studying this book and trying to see what kind of cover we could have. I've taught India all my life in foreign countries, so between my audience and India there is a wall. So I asked the designer, my research assistant who is present in this crowd, to give me a hole in the wall and show me through the hole the maddening crowds of India that are all the time. And I said, through this hole, my audience can see India, and I'll give a theory which will explain the method in their madness. Of course, the hole then became a pretty hole because it's the national bird of India. But the crowd that you see is a crowd not random. They are a purposive crowd of political entrepreneurs. They are doing what they have learned from Mahatma Gandhi, to combine, like smart people with money, put a bit of money into stocks and bit of money into bonds, hoping to reach a kind of risk neutrality. These political entrepreneurs put some of their political capital into rational protest and some of it into purposeful participation. And they combine the two. And they are locked in a battle against a state which has learned a lot from the British, who learned a lot from the Mughals, who learned something from the Marathas, and all of them learned something from a chap who wrote 400 years before the birth of Christ, that's Gopinath Arthashastra, which is how to rule without using too much overt force, how to have an implicit social contract. Because that's what the British did. They could rule a lot of people for a very long time with very little use of overt force. That's governance by stealth, and it is done by a two-track strategy. When there's a protest, hit them hard over the head. Then teach them how to play the piano. Send in the army and simultaneously start negotiating with the leaders and send in the election commission. If you win, well, you become chief minister and you rule, of course, under the watchful eyes of the central government. This is the context within which this game of democracy and development goes on. And it goes on because there are these 10 things India does rather well. Not all the time, not all over the place, but most of the time and in most places. I'll go over them very quickly. The most important of them is countervailing forces. India learned how to handle power. Now, how do you handle power? You cut power into 9 pieces: center, region, locality, and the separation of power between legislation, executive power, and judicial power. And not one hand should hold all of them. And it's not even enough to give the legislative power to the parliament. The Parliament itself would have its own balancing mechanism. The Lok Sabha will have the right to make laws, because every 5 years or so there will be an election to the Lok Sabha. Because the Lok Sabha represents majority at a particular time. But what do you do if that majority gets a bit drunk with his power and tries to enslave the minority? The majority alone cannot complete the legislative process. There is the Rajya Sabha, which represents a majority of 2 years earlier. So the negotiation starts all over again between the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. And I could go on and on. Any one person can go to the Supreme Court and ask for the legislative process to be reconsidered if he thinks it's unjust. And that's the kind of super legislative power the Supreme Court is acquiring gradually. And this is how the process of countervailing forces, which is institutionalized, is giving a fighting chance to all kinds of people. And that's why you know that there isn't a majority in India. It's a country of minorities. Name an issue, you'll find some people for, some people against. And that message of countervailing forces takes a peculiar shape called the coalition dharma. Everyone knows, including the BJP, that you can't rule alone. You need friends. Which is how the BJP, believe it or not, the Hindu Nationalist Party, is a minority member of an elected government in a Muslim majority state, Kashmir, but also in Christian majority states. And this coalition dharma gives a little bit of something to most people. Then comes elections as a method of social mobility. Mobility is the bottom of the society going up. Think of the traditional society as a pyramid. Upper caste, the tiny top, and middle caste and lower caste, the fat bottom. The moment you add vote, one man, one vote, you reverse that pyramid. And the pyramid implodes. That is what elections did. The early elections, the very early elections already showed individuals the power of the vote, and very quickly the language of elections became, what is in it for me? What happened to the cash that came? And very quickly one discovers that there isn't a built-in organic majority in India. And families are often divided. It's not rare to find families where people vote for different political parties within the same family. Then comes the Cooperative Federalism. The Constitution gives powers of making laws which have regional implications to regions, and laws which have national implications to the center. But they have quickly discovered that they have to hang together. That's the whole idea behind Cooperative Federalism. New legislation like the GST are transforming India into one market, but at the same time, states are also finding methods to protect their interests. And what is in more, federalism identifies like language, majorities which can sort of stay like Tamils in Tamil Nadu and so on in their specific regions. Well, what do you do if you are a Tamil speaker in Delhi? What do you do if you are a pious Muslim and you would like to have your child go to a madrasa? Do these people get agented out? No. The Constitution gives the right for children to learn in their native language in schools that their parents can build, and those schools and madrasas would actually get state help. And that is what the theorist Leibhardt calls constitutionalism. Give majorities the power in the regions. But those distinctive groups, which are not a majority anywhere, but are a distinctive group, can get a top slicing, which is how the Constitution guarantees 2 seats to Anglo-Indians. They have been very, very powerful ministers. So these 2 seats will be reserved for them. And the reservation also guarantees, similarly, representation to groups that used to be once powerless. I will go on to citizenship. India gives citizenship to those who are born on Indian soil, and citizenship in a very truncated way now more and more is available also to people who have left India. If you have a connectivity up to 4 generations, you can become a member of the overseas Indian citizenship, and that's one way India is developing a method to connect people. 30 million living outside India, as well as in various regions, a sense of their roots, as well as a sense of being part of a much larger community. These methods of deep politics, I would argue, are found in the Indian Constitution, but they didn't invent it. Often, they have gone back in the memory lane all the way. And in a recent book I have done from ISAS, I'm showing how 4 centuries before the birth of Christ, there is an implicit social contract between the Raja, the king, and the subjects, Praja. The Raja is there for the Praja, and the Raja has to rule under the watchful eyes of those who know the holy text. And Kautilya is extremely severe with the king. The king will have to be trained in kingship and has to keep legitimacy. What happens? And to keep legitimacy, he has to have a legitimate successor. But if the king is old and the successor dies out of snake bite, what do? Kautilya, I could quote you from the text, would require the king to allow one of his younger queens to be impregnated by someone he would select, and if it's a boy, he will name him as legitimate successor. This is the deep politics of India, that's the dharmic politics. So when democracy collapses in 1975, Indira Gandhi imposes emergency on India, people would say, adharma ho gaya. Indira Gandhi has broken the code, that this is not dharmic politics anymore. That is then the deep politics of India, and that's where the connectivity of contemporary to heritage comes in. Then comes this word, which everyone now knows. I didn't know this word until India sent off a spacecraft called Mangalyaan, and the story was that it was built by India at a fraction of the cost that NASA would have charged. How did India do it? It was called Jugaad, a kind of entrepreneurship and innovation. The reason I have Jugaad here is because I have now discovered that Jugaad can also be applied to other activities like building toilets. The Prime Minister has a program called Swachh Bharat. There have to be toilets in every house by 2019, and until the other day, a majority of Indians used to defecate in the open. Now it has gone below the 50% mark. How has this happened? I am amazed to read recently that local leaders have found a method. Of course, there's a bit of public money involved, but add toilet to dignity. If you don't have a toilet in your house, we will not give you one of our daughters in marriage. And these women who are at the forefront, men still want to go out, but women are at the forefront of this movement. And I can see a little bit of political jugaad, the combination of entrepreneurship and a bit of funds. Then comes the right to make a nuisance of oneself. That's the transparency, free media, proactive judiciary. Even the army is accountable. And finally, global India reaching out is not forgetting the local roots. That is the connectivity to the diaspora. So, what do Indians themselves make out of it all? Very quickly, because I'll be running out of time soon. When asked, do you think your vote has effect? 60% are saying yes, it does. Do you trust? Great deal. You find referee institutions like Election Commission and Judiciary have a great deal of trust. And if you add to it somehow trust, it's way below, way above majority. Even the police has way above majority. The hardest question is, suppose there are no parties or assemblies and elections were not held, do you think that the government in this country can be run better? Man, would you like me? asking a question in a face-to-face survey, usually people have a tendency to say yes, yes, yes. In this case, you have to say no, and 56% have said no. They want their democracy. So you would ask, how did India do it? Why wouldn't Pakistan do it? After all, they come out from the same colonial structure, and after independence, you could hear the same clipped British accent in the army, in mess halls, in clubs. So, why did same origin lead to dissimilar outcomes? Why did India become India, Pakistan become Pakistan? Indians, when told about Indian democracy, tend to believe there is some mystical substance, some kind of genius of Indian civilization, which is producing these results. I don't agree with that argument. I would argue that if Indian democracy works, it's because it has been constructed. There is nothing natural about it. And it happened because of 4 arguments, and on each 4, Pakistan got the wrong card, India got the right card. In the 1920s, Mahatma Gandhi taught Indians how to marry the modern, which is participation, with the traditional, which is the identity, and that's how Pradesh and Swaraj and Satyagraha were born. He also taught how to rise above the battle for office to something like public service and renunciation of power. That was not what Jinnah was doing. Jinnah's power did not come from that kind of radical synthesis, but by taking a position against the Congress party. Partition. Most people thought at independence it was a 1-0, 1 for Pakistan, 0 for India. Pakistan got Pakistan, Indians got Nehru. That was the joke. But if you add the square miles, you find in the 50s, India is ending up, after the integration of princely states, with more territory than the British ruled directly, and Pakistan got 2 wings separated and a theory of the state which eventually led to the loss of East Pakistan. India's multi-ethnic army and civil service actually work in tandem, and they hold India together in their own way, and in Pakistan they don't work together, they did not work together. And the democratic journey that produced India did not happen in Pakistan. Or in other words, if you look at it in terms of democratic theory, Pakistan has had a really hard time. And that is why the democracy struggle in Pakistan deserves all the attention that one can give it. So, has Indians got it completely right? And does India have nothing more to do? A quick word about that, and then I'll close the lecture. Do note that only 56% strongly support Indian legitimacy, and 60% think vote has effect. How about the others? It's a very large country. There is a very large reservoir of middle-class disillusionment and discontent. Even more, when it comes to trust, India has trust. Their referee institutions, their police, their civil servants, they don't trust their politicians. If democracy matters and politicians are not trusted, there is a problem. Which is why there are 5 things India must look at. Those who observe India, because India has a problem now. If you look at Indian press, they are uniformly, constantly going on about the Modi government. And yet the Modi government keeps winning election after election. Is India looking in 2 different directions? I tell those who are based in Delhi to go out to the villages. I don't believe my taxi driver told me school of analysis. Go out, look at India through Indian categories, and for the politicians, civil servants, I argue. All over the world, when people you say India is a democracy, they say, but there are Muslims. India is going up, but there is poverty. Take the buck of India by going out and understanding locally what is going wrong. And for both to remember Gandhi and remember the importance of public service and the modern basis of politics. Then to the Indian mantra of empowerment, entitlement, and enfranchisement, that necessary but not sufficient. If you know what makes ISAS work, try to get a trip report and an account through our accountants. That's where you learn what Singapore integrity and meticulous attention to details are about. There is a need for that, and often we fail on that. And finally, think globally, connect South Asia, not just India to India, but India to South Asia and to Southeast Asia. There is a lot of traction in that. With that, I'll bring it to a close. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Mitra. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the question and answer session. I would like to invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai on stage to chair the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Professor Mitra. Excellent presentation. And I'm sure there are many questions waiting to be had. May I ask for the first question?
Okay.
We have some age limit.
Yeah, I have a very short question. Okay, my question is on the representation of Muslims in India. If you take my own province, for example, the United Province, in the 1946 election, the Muslim League had 54 out of 238 seats, and today in UP, the number of Muslim MLAs have gone down significantly. It's even not possible to win elections without giving tickets to any Muslims. So do you think there's a need to revive the separate electorate in India, or to create some kind of a mechanism to guarantee minority representation in legislatures? So the only thing that India has is that, like you mentioned, it guarantees 2 Anglo-Indian seats in the Lok Sabha. And I think there's a need for more. If you take Pakistan as an example, in every house there, it actually guarantees minority representation in the Senate, in the National Assembly, the Position in Pakistan. So the thing is that, do you think there's a need to actually revive separate electorate in India? Thanks.
India does not have proportional representation. Representation is done on the basis of first past the post system. So simple majorities win, and representation therefore is not based on religion. There is a quota for untouchables and tribals, but no quota for Muslims. So the logic of democracy, winnability as it is called, is producing these results. Parties want to win, parties want to grab seats. It does not mean, having come to power, they don't realize the value of holding on to as many people as possible. Modi has turned around and said, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikash. And Vikashbad is developmentalism has become the new mantra. And his point is, or the point of the Hindu nationalists is, Muslims are not a pocket borrow. Muslims have to be released and given equal citizenship. That is the new motto. Now, as far as representation is concerned, there is no quota at all in other walks of life. But if you just look around, you would find in the entertainment industry, in sports, in public life, Muslims are not second to anyone. There was a time when the Meena Kumaris and Dilip Kumars had to take Hindu names. Today you can make a film called My Name is Khan and get a prize for it. So it's a very important point, but representation is not based on religion. It's based on political support, and the aim of politics is development.
Thank you very much, Professor Mitra. You gave us a sort of tour de force of India's democracy. My question is, what is your opinion about the future of democracy? In so many parts of the world, it seems that once democracy starts to deliver development, we have nasty creatures like nationalism, populism emerging. In Europe, especially, as you've named in the countries, Britain, France, Germany. So if you look at what's happening in Europe, and in India, and across Asia, what's your feeling about the future of democracy? What are the challenges ahead of us?
Thank you very much for reminding me that I'm going back to Germany to familiar ground because the million refugees that have come in, mostly Muslim, are producing in Germany some of the issues that Indian democracy is also throwing up. Can Muslims, refugees, ever become part of the German political community? So, worldwide, there is a kind of resurgence of things that we had seen only in the past, that mobilization around identity and divisiveness of democratic politics. That's answer number one. Second, there is no one size fits all. When I was talking about democracy in India, some people might have thought I was talking about Indian democracy. So, democracy eventually picks up some of the core values. Democracy in India requires federalism and secularism. But that's not the argument to say, therefore Sri Lanka must become federal or no democracy. Therefore Pakistan must give up Islam. So what I'm trying to argue is, first, democracy brings out sometimes things which are hidden away in the attic, like in Germany today, or populism in France. Secondly, democracy is a process and an experiment. Every society, eventually in course of this experimentation, develops its own peculiar democratic design. And that is what India has achieved. And as you might have noticed in my answer to the previous question, the process is still going on. How to produce a majority which will also be an inclusive majority, not a mechanical majority, but an organic one, connected to the deep politics of the country. Does that, okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Mitra, I was a very avid listener of you all the time. Today is the last day. I never come up with a question. I thought of questioning you and thanking you to engage me. I will have a four comments sort of, then I will ask your ideas on it. In fact, world democracy is in recession, and Indian politics failed to embrace meritocracy and was more like democracy of popularity, winning in the next election, clinging to the power over the last 50 years, except the National Democratic Alliance, and this time is led by BJP. And living here for 3+ years in Singapore, my idea about the government, the best form of government or the right form of government, which serves its people the best. The way you started your lecture, I mean, ensuring people's clause and all this. I mean, actually, I have been living in India for 5 years, and I found my friends debating China developed, we couldn't. They had the bit of authoritative, we had the democracy. There might have been debates on the right form of democracy, but it's failed in comparison with China. Is Indian democracy in recession, sort of? Like my previous question, a lady said, as popularism and other things disrupting. The way world democracy is disrupted. India is shaken up by this world changing. Thank you.
You have used a concept, I think you meant populism. Popular Indian democracy is a popular democracy in the sense that it is accountable to the majority. As far as populism is concerned, you are referring to the phenomenon where a group takes power on the basis of the popularity of a leader, and it sort of brings him into office and he becomes then a bit of a dictator. That's populism. In political science, it's also known as Peronism. And if you're asking me if Indian democracy is a populist democracy, I'll have to say absolutely not. It is a popular democracy, but not a populist democracy. Because the crowds you see are not the kind which pulverizes all differences. I've shown you in the slides how in the Gorakhpur parliamentary constituency, the party which has been winning it for the last 5 elections lost this time. Now, why is that? How is power changing hands? Now, this is where you find the complexity of Indian democracy and the complexity of the mechanism of winning elections. You see, no political party can expect to get like all the upper caste votes, and even if you did, in India, Brahmins are 4% of the population, and the bulk of the population are at the lower levels of this system, backward caste, former untouchables, tribals, and so on. So, even if you start with a core support from the upper caste, you will have to look downwards, and that is what creates short-term majorities. And election after election, those majorities change in complexion. That's the process of campaign, candidate selection, and victories. So far as corruption and other things that you mentioned, I'm not saying they don't exist, but if you look at the aggregate indicators, you can see that slowly India is emerging from that kind of stagnation. In the ease of doing business, the country has gone up, and the connectivity to the world outside is bringing not only foreign investment, but also expectations. People expect better governance. People expect their payments to be made directly to their bank accounts. That's the Jan Dhan Yojana of the government. That monies are accounted, and the Right to Information Act is opening up the possibility of holding local power, local politicians, local civil servants accountable. So that's the news of India that has not yet gotten into what I call the common sense about India. If you look more closely, you will find indicators that India is slowly turning around.
Thank you. Like the excellent professor that you are being stimulatingly instructive rather being a didactic pedagogue. I mean, you did a marvelous job of it. I have a very simple question. If the goal of the Republic is development, is India better off as a nation state, or should it be a state of nations?
There are two parts to this question. Development and nation state or state nation or a state of many nations. Right from the beginning, India took the broader definition of development, not just economic growth, but also social development. That way, India broke off from the tradition of developmental states. A developmental state is one which first defines development in terms of growth and takes it out of politics. So, you are not in terms of partisan politics to question the whole design, that we'll build a city here, we'll take this land, we'll build these things, and then we'll talk. So who will have power? So if you think of politics as two levels, politics of the system and politics within the system, in a developmental state, politics of the system is no longer political. Now, in India, both politics of the system and politics within the system were put on the auction block. So, definition of development would keep changing every 5 years. And it gets broader and broader and broader. So, it's no longer a choice between roti, kapla and makan and azadi, but all of it together. That was a broad definition. And that still continues to be the case. So far as nation states, state nations is concerned. Sure, the India of Karjan and some would say of Nehru thought of India as one big state with no internal differentiations. But if you simply look at the changing internal boundaries of India, you'd find how that unified picture has become a bit like a patchwork quilt. Today, you have these 29 states, and more are in the making, where the different concentrations of population are acquiring an identity and autonomy of their own. To the point, even within a tiny state called Tripura, there is a sub-state created for tribal population. Or in other words, India has developed a technique of how to make stakeholders out of rebels. And this rebels into stakeholders is creating this complex patchwork quilt. And that's how India does not particularly worry about secessionism, except when it becomes part of politics. But as long as you are not talking about going away from India, a lot of things that nation states are allowed to have, you can still have. Or in other words, they might have developed a method where you can both eat your cake and have it too. I'll just give you an example. When the British left, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, 4 major South Indian languages, thought the Brits are gone. Now British colonial rule will be soon replaced by Hindi colonial rule. Because after all, official language is a passport to office. And they were talking about having Dravidstan as a separate state. Then India discovered the 3-language formula. And the state of Tamil Nadu, where Tamils were in rampage, becomes the kind of state where Tamil becomes the hegemonic language. Never mind which party wins, it will still be Tamil. So, in 1962, when India attacked China, as the Chinese think of China attacks India as India's thing, every Indian state is competing to raise money to fight the Chinese. Guess who comes first? The Tamils. Where is Tamil? Where are the Tamils? Where are the Chinese? Or in other words, this is a peculiar Indian invention, where you are both having autonomy as well as the virtues of being part of a much larger whole. That's what I call the cooperative federalism of India.
Dr. Subrata, I come to you.
My question is this: is India paying a democracy tax? Let me take a minute to put that question in perspective. It's best understood when comparing India and China. 1950s, 1960s, India was ahead of China. 1970s, they were level. Then China pulled ahead. Today, China is 5 times India's GDP. More than 5 times India's per capita GDP. China clocked double-digit growth on a trot for 3 decades. India has never ever clocked double-digit growth. The number of people China lifted out of poverty is unprecedented in human history. India still has the largest number of poor people in the world. The explanation, they say, is that India has pulled back because of its democracy. People such as yourselves who prize democracy say that that doesn't matter, we still have democracy. I don't think that's a good enough answer. I think we need to evaluate the quality of India's democracy. Democracy, in my view, means a right to vote, a right to influence decisions when the government is in office, and the right to hold the government to account. India's democracy is limited to people having a right to vote. They cannot influence a decision when the government is in office, and they can't hold the government to account. So is this flawed democracy good enough, and is India paying a democracy tax? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have had this conversation before, and I've thought about it. In fact, I'm grateful that you asked the question, because part of it had gone into writing of this lecture, those past conversations. What do we learn from India-China comparison, or for that matter, India-Pakistan comparison? Even if I want to, I don't have a magic wand. I can't make a China out of India or India out of China. What we must do is to compare the system against itself and see where it gives in. Which is why I'm not talking about democracy, but the institutions that make both accountability and entitlement go together. And I put together arbitrarily 10 things, there could be more. But those are the things I'll be working at. Now, I'm not trying to win a debater's point saying, well, India didn't kill 45 million people. But that's probably not the main argument. China is growing the Chinese way, India is growing the Indian way. Now, let's see what one can learn from the Chinese example. What one can learn from the Chinese example is the power of putting together accountability and entitlement. I mean, I've studied not only Chinese politics, I've spent time in Chinese villages. And I've seen how they are committed to the whole idea of growth, but they are not necessarily ignoring their fellow villagers. Now, this is where I would argue, and those are my 5 last points. Let's remember Gandhi. Let's remember the least privileged, and let it not be a litany. Let's seriously believe in Vikashbad or development. Now, that will be my generalization so far as intra-state comparison in India is concerned. Why are parts of India growing much faster than other parts? What knowledge can we transfer from one region to another? Where is accountability missing? Why is Odisha, my state, gotten into a system where elections are won on the basis of subsidies for rice? Why not talk in terms of states like Uttar, which don't give subsidized rice, but give you enough wherewithal so that you can buy good basmati rice at 10 rupees a kilo? I mean, so my attempt would be to have intra-state comparison and to transfer knowledge and look out for inspiration, not necessarily for the Chinese method of eliminating all obstacles. I mean, on one example, I was in Beijing and I was admiring some nice buildings. So my folks who were receiving me said, this is where the flower garden of Beijing used to be a couple of years ago. What happened to them? He said, well, we decided to build these buildings here. Where are these other people? They're 40 miles away from Beijing. They still produce flowers there. Now, that's the kind of thing one wishes one could do in India. One is not doing it that way, but doing it another way. Slowly, steadily. You know that every day, so many kilometers are being added to Indian roads. How is that happening? How is India creating new infrastructure without compromising democracy? So we should make haste slowly, not even complacent, inspire ourselves from other examples, but at the same time, not give up the commitment to Azadi. Even if you want to, I don't think Indian voters should allow you to. So, as a think tanker, I can legislate for India. All I can do is to understand what was given to India, what have Indians added. Why did India get the good card at independence and not Pakistan? And what must India not forget? And what are those things India should be attending to? I hope that will keep the debate between us going.
High Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Professor Mitra. It was a very, very electrifying talk. I think you compressed a lot of history and political science and theory and practice into a very short span of time. It was really...
Can you speak to the microphone?
It was really impressive. I had a couple of observations with regard to the conceptual and academic part of democracy talk. In the very first batch of the slides, you showed some slides, people chanting Azadi, and
you said this too is democracy, the way this situation is being handled. My observation was that you had to stretch the definition of democracy a little bit more, than what is the conventional definition of democracy when force is being used against demonstrations. I think it was Carlyle who said that if the entire humanity is on one side and only one human being is on the other side, that one human being also has equal right as the rest of the humanity to raise his voice and to propagate his point of view. It was also very interesting and heartening for me, that you were constantly comparing and contrasting Indian democracy against the Pakistani democracy. It was really very interesting for me. And I just wanted to add to that, that Anish Mitra raised a very, very pertinent question, I think, regarding the rights of minorities and how they are protected. I just wanted to let you and the audience know that very recently we have elected Krishna Kumari as a senator. She has been elected as a member of our Senate, and she was very happy, obviously, about her election. She belongs to some lower caste, and when she joined the Senate and announced, her name was announced, and someone said she belongs to the lower caste, and that goes to the credit of Pakistani democracy that she became the senator. She said, no, I don't want, to use the term caste. It's like an imported material, from across the border. So don't use that for me. And the person apologized to her. That was a very healthy sign, I think, of democracy in Pakistan. My question was, if you can call it a question, regarding the secularism in India. Secularism, like democracy, is and was a fundamental postulate of the Indian polity. So, over the years, seeing the evolution of democracy in India, how do you assess the health of secularism, in India, in today's India? Because the two needs to, proceed, pari passu, in tandem, democracy and secularism. Are they proceeding in tandem in India? Thank you very much.
This is one of the hardest questions to confront if you're talking about democracy and development. Because development is not just economic growth, development is also the creation of a political community, a level playing field, where everyone has a good fighting chance. Now, a majoritarian democracy can win and transform the minority into second-class citizens. That was the fear that marked India's struggle for independence, and that is what led to the partition. And many British observers were very skeptical of the ability of India to give a fair chance to the Muslims who stayed back. The Muslim middle classes mostly left from North India, and it took a long time, and we get this from the research of my colleague Professor ISAS. The Muslim minority of India is slowly coming up, probably still suffering from the loss of their own leaders at independence. But having said that, Muslims of India have done quite well in many walks of life, except now there is a fear and anxiety, I've talked about it already, that Hindu nationalism will put the clock back. That's the fear. I've got three answers to that. First, it is not the policy of the government of India, led by Prime Minister Modi and the BJP, to do away with Indian secularism. Secularism, if you understand it in the double Indian meaning, is still very much alive. One is Sarva Dharma Samabhava, equal attitude towards all religions. The other is Dharma Nirapekshata, that the state will not be turned into a religious state or a Hindu state. So, in constitutional terms, it is there. Second, in terms of the Indian middle classes, you'll be amazed how competitive the Hindu middle class is, bulk of it, to protect those rights, right to religious freedom. And these are the activists who write and go out. The third is the sheer logic of winning. If you want to win, you have to build coalitions. The reason the BJP lost in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar is because of the coalition of the backward castes, segments of the Dalits and Muslims. It's a very important voting bloc, and that message has gone out. Or in other words, the ultimate protection comes from the logic of short-term coalitions and the electioneering of groups of people. And there is no Muslim League to protect Muslims of India. There is no need. There are the NDA coalition partners who draw a lot of support from the Muslims as well as Dalits. Those are the coalitional patterns. The reason I'm saying this, because as a political scientist, I see very, very strict boundaries to how far Hindu nationalism can hijack the main developmental trajectory of Indian democracy. And I would always go back to the Supreme Court. It is still there, and it is still there as the ultimate protector of what is called the basic structure of the Constitution. The basic structure of the Constitution remains committed to the right to the freedom of religion. That's a sort of roundabout answer to the specific question. I'm not saying that there is no anxiety among India's minorities at the moment. It is there. And that's why the second point of my 5-point conclusion is take the butt of India. Like Mahatma Gandhi, go out to understand every single pair of eyes which are full of tears. Why is she crying? Now, that is the kind of conclusion that a good analysis of democracy should lead to. The other, since you are a political scientist yourself, I would also tell you, High Commissioner, my takeaway from this, is it possible to have liberal politics in an illiberal context? After all, castes, religions, or the denial of individualism, this is part of our South Asian culture. So can we have the liberty, equality, fraternity that marked French Revolution, and that's the basis of European liberalism? The way India is doing it by guaranteeing individual rights, which is the right of majority to rule, and group rights in the Constitution, both are guaranteed. And as long as that balance is there, I will not worry too much about secularism being hijacked.
Thank you. Now, the last question from High Commissioner Mitra.
Just a comment. I mean, it's not usually my position to speak from the floor here. Normally I come here to listen, but I was listening carefully to your answer to the last question. One, of course, you made the point that you saw a certain degree of contradiction between growth trajectory and rise of nationalism, right? Because you said you don't see how Hindu nationalism will come in the way of growth. First, there's a definitional problem with it. The second point is that if you go by that argument, then there should not have been any growth in China because this is a bastion of a certain kind of nationalism. Second, when we speak of minority anxieties, I cannot think of any country in the world, including this one, where there won't be minority anxieties. So that by itself is not an argument for or against it, right? The third point is that the answer to the question is a very short one. Secularism is less a social construct and more a constitutional mandate in the way that it is built for. And it is both part of a constitutional requirement as well as the process of social and intellectual engineering, that societies try to evolve into a more just, more equal place. I think that, in the context of Indian Constitution and Indian rule of law, and in every respect, secularism remains very intact, notwithstanding the kind of sometimes social issues that we see, which is, of course, there are many examples around the world of, that whether it is the rights guaranteed under the Constitution, individual and civil liberties, whether it is in terms of religious rights guaranteed under Article 25 onwards, and the right to preach, propagate, right to follow your practice, develop your place of worship, as well as the developmental rights. That means when you are talking about a language, say in the case of Muslims, it's Urdu, right? It continues to be there in almost all the states wherever Urdu was spread. When you talk about the social support system, or when you talk about the economic support system that the government has created, which is this time now the assistance or financial assistance given to minorities for their developmental needs, is actually at a record level. So if you see, there is sometimes a contradiction, of course, between the, as you said, the policy of the state, the mandate of the constitutions, and sometimes the way politics plays itself out. But if the question is whether the judiciary, the state, and the legislature and the executive combine to protect the essence of secularism and of democracy, then I think there is no question on it at all. And there is no reason to question that at all at this point.
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you very much for those details. You are much better placed than me to show in reality how Indian democracy is working out in the very, very difficult area of majorities, majority communities, and rights of minorities and secularism. A difficult balance.
Well, actually, that way every community in India can be a minority, because we are a nation of minorities. There are multiple identities which exist, and all of this actually in some ways captured in a constitution of great genius.
Absolutely. I would argue that democracy is a work in progress. It's unfolding as much in India as in Germany. How do we reconcile individual identities with the collective identity of the community? And I would end with a very, very difficult argument I have not been able to make in Singapore so far, but today I will. The cow. Let's spell it out. There are cow vigilantes, and this is not Indian government policy, but not to say that those vigilantes are not there, or that people don't get killed out of the suspicion that they're eating beef or carrying beef. It happens in India. And it's a matter of shame for all of us, but it does happen. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the constitutional problem of what to do about the cow. Why is this a constitutional problem? Every Hindu, there are lots of them in India, would pass through 3 moments of transition: at birth, marriage, death. Each of them would require a religious ceremony which would involve a bit of ghee. That is what connects one to the cow and to heritage. So cow is a sacred animal. And in terms of the right to religion, every Hindu would say, well, cow is my sacred animal, protect it. It's there in the constitution. On the other hand, cows, like human beings, produce boy cows and girl cows. And with the tractors replacing the bullock, and with the coming of modernization in agriculture, agricultural machinery are taking the place of bullocks and bullock carts. What is one to do with surplus cattle? What do you do with a cow when it gets old and dies? Now, is there a rational bovine policy for India? This is the kind of hard question that think tanks must think about, that those of us who care for democracy, care for civility, and care for economics must think about. Is there a way out? Is there a way to name one pretty cow as the sacred cow of the village and rest of them to be given over to animal husbandry and agriculture? Can India have such a radical solution? Now, the Constitution gives the right to the freedom of occupation. What do you do if you are a butcher? These are, ladies and gentlemen, very, very hard questions. The reason we ought to ask them, and publicly, that is my advantage in talking about India in Singapore or in Germany. Probably it will be harder to talk this way. And Singapore has given me that space. ISAS has given me that space. I owe it to the chairman. We have that kind of atmosphere. We really talk among ourselves. But talking we must, because not talking about these hard issues will not make them go away. It will make them fester and reappear as part of much larger problems.
Thank you. Before I wind up this meeting and thank Professor Mitra, I just wanted to share a little bit of Singapore history with you. Nothing to do with what we discussed today, except the democracy part. If you have read today's State Acts, or the ladies, you would have seen that our largest opposition party, and we do have opposition parties, they elected a new leader. He's Mr. Pratham Singh. This is a leftist Chinese-based party, which is its first founder and chairman was an Iraqi Jew from India. Second was a Tamilian from Sri Lanka. Third was the Chinese, and now fourth is a Sikh. Now what I wanted to tell you was the co-leader of the Workers' Party, the Iraqi Jew, is here in this room, Mr. Amir Ali Jumabot. He's trying to hide. But I remember Nanyang University, which is no longer exists, it's the leftist Chinese-based university. They had a big seminar. And they invited Mr. Marshall, the founder, and he was accompanied by Mr. Amir Ali Jumabot with a hammer stuck in his belt, because the symbol of the Workers' Party was the hammer, and they had the hammer there. Now, there was a student, a leftist student, who was also asked to speak, happened to be me. So I just want to tell you this little story before I say thank you to Mr. Professor Mitra. I think he has done a wonderful job, not only as the director of the ISAS, but even in this presentation. I think very provocative. As someone said, electrifying. I think it's High Commissioner Nazrullah Khan who used that word. I think it's an appropriate word. He's done very well. We thank him, and I'm glad that he will come back, and perhaps at that time we can have further discussion. Thank you, Professor Mitra.
Thank you, Ambassador Pillai and Professor Mitra. With that, we have come to the end of this lecture. We thank you all for your participation and would like to invite you all for a tea reception outside this function room. Have a good evening. Thank you.
You didn't do that for me.